All right. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to today's SUNY online webinar, Contemplative Pedagogy in Online Learning. I am Aline Slating, Senior Instructional Designer with SUNY Online, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today and to introduce our presenters. Dr. Michele Forte is an associate professor and mentor in community and health services at SUNY Empire State University and a licensed social worker. Michele has previously served SUNY Online, lending her expertise to the coordination and development of online student support initiatives. Susan Warner is the manager of online student supports at SUNY Online and supports campuses in their services and initiatives that directly impact online student success. Michele and Susan co-lead Foundations of the Online Student Support Role, a program offered through the SUNY Center for Professional Development. Thank you, Michele and Susan, for being with us today and sharing your experience and expertise on this topic. Welcome, everyone, and I will hand it over to them.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks, Aileen, for that introduction. So I'm going to start us off with the first few slides, and then I'm going to pass it over to Susan. We want to talk to you today about contemplative pedagogy, not as meditation, so to speak, or anything mystical, rather, but as a framework, maybe even a practical framework for creating the kind of intentional space where students actually have to think rather than just produce outcomes, which is not, of course, to imply that students aren't thinking in all kinds of structures, but this has an intentionality to it we think that might be important for online courses. So we're going to talk through these elements in a course we teach for the SUNY CPD called Foundations of the Online Student Supports Role. It is one of the three courses that make up the online certificate. The shameless plug, by the way, we think the courses are good, and we'll talk through some of the assignments today. We also think that maybe these practices can be applied in other online learning contexts. And then we want to show you, as we were preparing for this, we actually thought, well, wait, we can probably make these assignments even more contemplative, right? So we have some examples of where we iterated and added more of these elements to the course and to a few of the assignments. So, what's a slide deck without Albert Einstein and Michael Scott on the same slide, right? So what is contemplative pedagogy? Well, most of us probably can intuit at least that it would emphasize reflection and awareness practices to slow coursework, right? So we're so boom, 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 assess, 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 let's go, right? And I think maybe that gets heightened in the online teaching world. So we over assess, maybe. We look at quality versus quantity, maybe, to make up for some of the perhaps to many of us more familiar seat-based classroom settings. And these practices encourage us, instead of doing that over assessment, to actually allow time for deeper processing and integration. So it's an approach that emphasizes slowing down, right? And both the pace and the amount of learning to allow for deeper processing and integration of thoughts. Confession, I think a few of my courses that I teach fully online at Empire. I think a few of my courses are overly assessed just to sort of get through the material. And what this perspective says, what about relational learning? How can we integrate that to honor community, elevate dialogue, right? And the sort of the collective wisdom. So a creation of maybe mini communities of practice, learning communities, certainly communities of practice in the case of the course that we'll discuss. And we wonder too if this can invite students to connect their academic work with their own sort of deeper purposes, whether they're professional, political, academic, and so forth. So we think this is super important, particularly in the online setting. So if we go to the next slide, I thought it was very clever to have a dog doing downward dog, right? So sometimes people hear contemplative pedagogy. It's not automatically synonymous with meditation, as I said, but though that slowing and reflective sort of mindfulness, that meditative thought process, both embedded in the assignments and maybe even the way we invite students into the course. Um, we wonder if that slowing of the pace can allow for that deeper processing and integration. By the way, I do have some citations that I can share with everyone if you're interested in this. We developed just a little bit of a list as we were preparing. So when we have the relational learning that honors community and dialogue and collective wisdom, we really feel like the course is enriched in ways that students remember. I have a colleague at Empire who said that sometimes she gets tired of thinking through how curriculum can be relatable to students, right? Because sometimes the point of learning is to not have relatable content, at least in the immediate. But contemplative pedagogy might invite participants into ideas with which they are otherwise unfamiliar and think, wow, wonder if I can see myself in this. How can I see macro contexts? How can I see my own community, other people in this course? So it really is about slowing down the pace. So if we go to the next slide, we think that, Susan is the manager for online student supports at SUNY Online, and I've done this work as well. And we wonder about our online students, and we wonder about their relationship to our campuses and to pedagogy and to the faculty members, right? Or to themselves as learners, really. And so we think this perspective matters, maybe to all courses, but certainly to online courses. Sometimes our online students experience maybe this idea of always being on with no natural transitions between work, school, and life. So, you know how sometimes the things that benefit us are actually the things that are maybe some barriers. So, yes, it's great to have asynchronous courses that are always available to participants who otherwise may not be able to, attend in time, place, and space. But the drawback of that is there might be some burnout, right? Always on, no intentional pauses between work and home. Students may feel isolated. Sometimes online distance learning can feel disconnected and lonely. I've heard from students I advise at Empire, this is certainly the case. And we wonder if contemplative pedagogy, if these practices build community in ways that are sort of intentional and also incentivized, right? So we're not just building a community of practice for the sake of doing so. It is a part of the assessment, the suite of assessments, but it just has a way of elevating the relational knowing, even in those virtual spaces. And I've heard from colleagues who've taught face to face, I taught face to face for years, that sometimes that relational piece is what feels lost. So it speaks to the disconnection, right? Sometimes students, sometimes even as a faculty member, honestly, I experience courses as content to consume rather than meaning to construct or co-construct, right? And contemplative approaches, we think, invite whole person engagement. And we also wonder when students are overwhelmed, when there's a lot of assessment on the board, we wonder if they lose sight of why they're learning what they're learning. So if we introduce a more contemplative lens, the practices could reconnect learning or more deliberately connect learning, I guess, to purpose, no matter the modality, but especially important in online, where the learning communities might not be evident, right? We may have students who participants who never felt like they were a part of a learning community at one point in their life. And maybe this is a way to sort of elevate that sense. Okay. And you hear me going back and forth between students and participants. Since it's a CPD course, we call these are our colleagues across SUNY who are, taking these courses with us. So we tend to call them participants, and we can call students in online courses participants and learners, right? There's the politics of what we call people in our courses, but that's why you hear me, at any rate, slipping back and forth. So any thoughts or questions about this so far? Susan, anything I'm missing by way of introduction?
No.
No? Okay. So if we go to the next slide, I actually sort of added this last minute. And Susan, thank you for redoing the slide deck and including it. But it did occur to me that um, AI, right? AI has landed in my courses. It's landed everywhere. It's landed in our lives. And so we also then wonder if the contemplative approaches might not be able to offer these sort of a little bit of a counter narrative to the more AI generated content, which I'm seeing, I'm sure lots of you are seeing, and as well as address the potential depersonalization, right, of the asynchronous learning. So we were talking before y'all joined us about Paulo Freire. Lots of you know Pedagogy of the Oppressed. We're laughing that, what's old is new again. So this is these concepts, right, of slowing down curriculum, offering reflective moments, asking students what they think, asking them to critique the material is right out of Freire's playbook, more elegantly stated than I'm doing naturally. But the emphasis on that critical consciousness and the authentic dialogue, the authentic voice, um, is the, I suppose, counterpoint to AI generated, right? And it's also the counterpoint to lots of the conversations around the commodification of education, what degrees count, what degrees are worthy, right? We're in a very strange time, to say the least, in higher ed. So we're wondering if some of these sort of contemplative practices, both for faculty and for students, right, um, encourages us to not produce these sort of surface level responses, right? Again, slowing down, engaging reflectively. As our colleague Renee Domino from Monroe Community College says, take a mindful breath, take a pause. Where is your body right now as you're even reading this text on the page, right? So it becomes an act of resistance, activism in some ways. That might be another webinar, but this does center student agency and genuine meaning making. So if we kind of think back over those of us who've been around higher ed for a while, we hear the emphasizing reflection rather than the efficiency of the outputs, right? We hear the development of the authentic voice, disruption of what Freire used to call banking education, right? We deposit the information and we ask for a withdrawal in in a test, right, or some sort of assessment like that. So we're hoping that this approach humanizes online spaces in ways I think, we've been grappling with this across SUNY for years in the online space. And certainly SUNY Online is, a leader in helping us think through what that looks like. So I think we can go to the next slide. As I said, we're going to look at foundations of the online student support role. It's course one of our three-course series. We think some of the course-wide features are that, and you can let us know how well we did, right? And we have some thoughts about improving as well. So we have this sort of each week, it's sort of an iterative scaffolded approach. So each week builds on insights from the previous week. So we hope that there's a deepening of understanding rather than a linear accumulation. I should say the courses are 6 weeks long, just by way of reference. Peer engagement is absolutely required. Learning happens in the dialogue, in the discussions. We try to make the discussions very robust and rich and have opportunities for good takeaways so that participants can actually do something with the learning they have in this course. We try to honor the lived experience and expertise of the participants. So we have Susan's done an amazing job of finding relevant post-pandemic, right, online, resources for online learning. We also ask students to suggest resources. We also honor their expertise and their lived experience. We try to focus on student and participant wellness, so the content is contemplative, care for the whole person rather than the academic performance, as it were. So we wanted to now take a look at the course and just a few assignments. Susan's going to start to lead us through this next section. By the way, for the record, I said this to the other group, but I want to say it out loud to you. Susan Warner is the reason this PowerPoint is accessible. She is available for a very, very high hourly fee to consult with you on your PowerPoints. Susan, how'd I do?
Wow.
right?
But thank you,
High fee.
Michelle. Everything was great up to that last comment, but thank you so
High fee
much.
though. High fee, right? Very
There
high.
you go.
Yeah, I'll negotiate for you.
Oh, well, let's take a look at our week one discussion in the course one. So, for this discussion, we're asking who are our students? So, you'll notice that the discussion doesn't start with theory or broad ideas about online students. Instead, we're really asking participants to slow down and begin with their own context. So, before talking about students in general, we're inviting them to reflect in the first person. Who are my students and what is my campus's reality now? And that shift is very intentional. It creates space for awareness and reflection rather than jumping straight into assumptions and solutions. So the prompt also brings in positionality, encouraging participants to notice how their role, identity, institutional context shape what they see and how they interpret student needs. So we know that that kind of self-awareness is a core contemplative practice, especially in student support work. There's also an invitation to notice change over time, particularly the post-pandemic shifts many of us are still navigating. Basically, reminding participants that nothing is static, students' needs change over time, institutional realities change right along with them, and we have to be ready to adapt. And what I really appreciate here is that self-reflection becomes the starting point for learning. Instead of defaulting to that one-size-fits-all approach, participants practice contextual awareness, paying attention to the specific realities that they're working within. And this reflection doesn't stay individual. Hearing from peers across different roles and SUNY and non-SUNY institutions adds another contemplative layer, as well as it builds connection, it reduces isolation, and it strengthens that sense of a learning community in the online space.
I'm so
Michelle.
glad. Yeah, no, just thinking, I'm so glad you said SUNY and non-SUNY participants. We do have participants from outside of SUNY. That's so excellent, Susan. And it's really it's always interesting, right? Because we understand our system. We can be a little focused, obviously myopic about that. So it's interesting to hear how other campuses, other places kind of grapple with some of the things about which we speak in this course. So here's another example from week two. This assignment is actually spread across two slides. So the OLC scorecard, Alex Pickett's on this call. She certainly knows about this thing. It's a self-assessment tool used by SUNY campuses and other institutions to evaluate and ideally improve build on strengths, right? The quality and consistency of student support for online students and blended learning as well. SUNY Online integrates it into the institutional readiness process, by the way, for to see how well prepared the campuses are for the taking on online learning in a thoughtful way. And we could actually ask Susan or our colleague Maureen Kinney if you'd like to know more about that for your campus. If we go to the next slide in this assignment, so here are some of the contemplative elements, right? The students are looking at their own work against these sort of standards, right, that the OLC has created. So there's a little bit of a metacognitive piece. They're invited to critique the standards, by the way. And it also requires sort of holding both, here are our strategic strengths, right? Here are the campus strengths, and here's like a learning edge. This is the growth area simultaneously. So it isn't we're all good and we're all bad. It's here are our strengths and there's some areas to improve, right? It's that non-dualistic, non-binary thinking. It so it's more contemplative self-inquiry without judgment, right? Where does the campus excel? Where can we improve? What are other campuses doing? What are other ideas we can borrow? What are ideas we can lend, right? It also invites some planning for future action based on the participants' reflection. And, sometimes participants have heavy spheres of influence, sometimes they don't. And so we invite them to think about that too. If you had a magic wand, what would you do? Since you don't have a magic wand, what can we do, right? And it's sort of this non-judgmental observation, at least we hope, we emphasize that. And the gap analysis that we hope is developmental versus punitive, which is another feature, right, of contemplative inquiry. We can critique and notice barriers, but we can also notice strengths from which we can move towards maybe more aligned action. Then the next one is the saucy. Susan's going to tell us about
Ooh,
that.
yes. So in week 4, the discussion's built around the SAUCY tool, and probably many of you are familiar with it. And the SAUCY is the SUNY Online Student Success Inventory. It's an online learning readiness assessment tool that's available to campuses to use with their students at no cost. So for the week 4 discussion, participants are asked to take the SAUCY, not as an expert or as an evaluator, but as students. And that's really an important contemplative move. By taking the survey from a student perspective, participants are engaging in an embodied empathy practice. They're not just imagining what the experience might be like, they're actually stepping into it. And this process also invites what we call a beginner's mind. Participants are encouraged to set aside their professional expertise for a moment and encounter the tool with fresh eyes, noticing how it feels to move through the questions, interpret the results, and make sense of the experience. And another key element here is that the course creates a space for first-person experience before critique. So rather than jumping straight into analysis, participants are first asked to reflect on their own results and reactions. And that sequencing, experience first, analysis second, is a core contemplative practice. And the good news is the reflections don't stay private, right? When participants share strengths, concerns, and areas of improvement, their individual insights contribute to a larger pool of collective knowledge. So this form of relational learning, where personal experience becomes a resource for the entire community. And there's also a reflective feedback loop built into this activity. Participants move from experience to reflection to contribution. So in other words, they try the tool, they think critically about it, and then they offer feedback that can inform practice and improvement. And finally, the prompts invite participants to think beyond evaluation and toward impact, student impact, recommending ways that the tool could better support student success and how the results might guide more targeted and responsive student support. So altogether, this activity models contemplative pedagogy by grounding learning in empathy and perspective taking. And one last thing I want to highlight, participants' feedback on how the SAUCY could be improved hasn't just stayed in the course. It's actually helping to inform the work of a SUNY committee that's currently redesigning the tool. So an updated version of the SAUCY 2.0, is on track to be available to campuses in fall 2026, and we're super excited about it. So stay tuned on that.
Susan, how much does it cost campuses to integrate the SAUCY into their practice?
Michele, I'm so glad you asked. The SAUCY is free for campuses to use.
We love to hear free. That's excellent. Thank you. It actually, I don't know
Oh,
if we've
wait, there's
ever.
more. No, I'm
But
just
wait, there's
kidding.
more. Yeah, that's right. Where's Harry Cargill? We need him. But I don't know if we've ever actually said this out loud in any of our meetings. Maybe we have, but when you were talking about the saucy, it occurs to me that most of us, ish, I don't want to get too generationally bogged down here, but most of us did not learn online when we were in college, right? So that empathy piece, Susan, that perspective taking when we ask participants to do this, maybe we've never even thought about, right? Like what it might be like to be an online student at all. So we're mapping our own experiences of face-to-face learning onto an online experience, so we can't see some of these gaps, right? Some of these opportunities to improve. So whatever you said just made me think about that. Thank you.
Good point.
So here's the next, here's another example. We have this week 5 best practice integration. And so, again, we think some of the contemplative elements here are asking students to, and you can go to the next slide, Susan. I think the next one is just
Oh, yeah.
the end of it, right? Yeah, because it didn't fit on 2 slides again. Yeah. So it asks students to synthesize the learning in the course into one meaningful practice for them. So some kind of integration, right? And we think it requires a little discernment. So by that, even though it's only a 6-week course, they've not only um, self-reflected, they've looked at their colleagues' efforts as well. And so they now have to think through what resonates the most for me. It's a little bit of a values clarification, right? What's the one behavioral thing I could change? What's the one process I could change that makes sense based on this learning and the reality of my campus? Um, we hope that when we created these courses, we wanted them to be meaningful unto themselves and then also meaningful as sort of a 3-course suite. So we wanted to move the course from maybe more fragmented insights to coherent action, right? Pathways for coherent action. And uh, Susan in particular is very insistent that the discussions have takeaways. And she was correct in that insistence. And this is the contemplative piece, right? That it connects to personal role and context. It's situated in the participants' lives, not just this sort of generic, best practices musing to which perhaps they cannot aim because of lots of reasons, right? Structure, resources. We also think that it emphasizes synthesis over accumulation. So it isn't, now I guess now we're at the end. Next, it's what was this sort of cumulative learning? What am I taking away? What am I maybe pulling into the next course, pulling into my own professional obligation, pulling into practice with my own students? And we also encourage students to articulate the authentic resonance of the assignment. In one of the other courses, the 3rd course actually we're teaching now, one of the participants said, "Yeah, I don't really agree with the resources this week." And I'm like, "That is so good. Tell us why." Right? Because it's not about this theory is amazing. I'm going to, it's a hill I'm going to die on. It is about what's the authentic response to this. Here's the theory. This is the practice. Let's interrogate the chasms and the power structures therein. And so it connects learning to lived work, we hope.
Mhm.
I think we have one more.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I love this. Thank you, Michelle. And I love this week 5 practice because uh, it's really taking the learning and applying it to the specific role that student has on the campus. Because the folks who are taking these courses are not just providing direct student success coaching or academic advising. They are in multiple roles. And
Mhm.
so it's a great learning experience for me as well and helps
Yeah.
inform the work that I do. So I love that very much.
Excellent.
All right. And then finally, week 6. So this is where we really lean into the community and shared learning. So the peer review activity is explicitly framed as a community of practice. So it's that rather than a traditional critique exercise. We ask participants to review one peer's week 5 best practice using a structured outline, which keeps the feedback focused, constructive, and grounded in care. And before responding, they really have to slow down and really listen to another person's work. What is the peer trying to do? What's working? Where might there be room for growth? And that process invites that compassionate critique. So the goal isn't judgment or even evaluation, but thoughtful attention, naming strengths, offering a few areas for clarification or growth, and asking questions and sharing ideas that could strengthen the work. There's also an important contemplative element on the receiving side, right? So we know that taking in feedback requires some humility and openness and an awareness of maybe ego, recognizing that learning happens in relationship, not in isolation. So overall, this activity reinforces that, I love this, feedback is a gift, not a transaction, and individual insights contribute to collective wisdom. So the outcome is a shared commitment to evaluating each other's work, which we have found, Michele and I have found, often has contributed beyond the end of the course for our participants. But wait, could it be improved? Of course not. No, of course it can. And actually, Michele and I have a couple of changes in the works to bring more contemplative elements into the course. And we want to very briefly share two additions with you. So first one, we're looking at week one assignment of who are our online students, and we're adding a short centering piece um, right at the start. Like, so before the main discussion about who our online students are, the prompt asks participants to pause and reflect. Who was I as a student? What did I need? What did I feel? Did I feel seen or unseen? And then we encourage them to spend about 10 to 15 minutes journaling privately. They're not going to be posting this, but we want them to journal on questions like, what assumptions do I bring based on my own experience? What biases might I hold about online students? And how does my identity shape what I notice or overlook? And then on week four, again, back to the saucy, Michele and I are adding a couple of contemplative steps to the saucy tool discussion. Before taking the saucy, we're asking participants to do a quick empathy exercise. So we're going to ask them, imagine themselves as different kinds of students. So maybe it's a first gen student who's never taken an online course, a working parent, someone managing anxiety, or maybe a student who English is a second language. And as they answer each question, we ask them to notice, does this make sense? This inventory that you're taking, does it assume knowledge I might not have? Does it feel welcoming or intimidating? And then after they complete the saucy, we're asking them to, again, journal privately before submitting feedback, just to give them that time, that pause to reflect. And they're prompted to reflect on questions like, what reactions did I notice? Confusion, ease, frustration? Which questions made me pause and why? And if I was a struggling student, how would that survey land? And these steps are meant to enhance the contemplative practice by encouraging real, experiential perspective taking rather than just theoretical empathy. They invite, like we mentioned before, that beginner's mind, seeing the tool with fresh eyes, not expert assumptions. So it keeps the process student-centered, helping participants notice who might be excluded or confused.
You can tell what shows I watch, right? Is everybody clear about what television shows I watch? Like if we had more slides, I think I would have added Community and Superstore there. Those are the two that are not represented. So just to recap, oh, good, I'm getting hearts for my TV watching habits. That's good. That's good. So as I said, we just had a participant say in course 3, yeah, I don't really think I agree with all of the theories and suggestions, for this week. And we're like, great, absolutely. Say more about what, tell us about your campus, tell us about what's going on. And we think that this kind of communication, this level of revision, right? That we don't want student participants to agree with courses just to agree with them. So to us, this means that contemplative effort, we hope, is working because students are able to slow down enough, participants can slow down enough to critically examine the material, to notice where their own thinking diverges, maybe think about why my own thinking diverges. Is it because I'm a white woman who went to college and whatever decade and I didn't go online, I went face to face. So what assumptions am I making about the person sitting in front of me about whom I may have zero idea, right? So we encourage them to lead with curiosity, not only with their own relationship to the curriculum, but also to what the curriculum is suggesting they practice in their professional lives, right? And develop an independent position rather than passively accepting expert authority. Uh, so we think that's more authentic cognitive work. Sorry, AI, that AI certainly cannot replicate, but also it's more bringing back the 90s, remember, more dialogical thinking with these more contemplative practices. So if the goal is knowledge constructed through more authentic dialogue between, in our case, right, the course facilitators and our participants, but really our participants are our colleagues. So if it's between professors and students, right, we always interrogate that power imbalance. And so rather than transmitting from expert, you might have some content expertise, to a passive receiver, it's rather rebooted and revised using that Frary lens, right? It positions both parties. And Susan just said it. I learn, she learns from our participants, so do I. And so then it positions both parties as co-learners who bring legitimate knowledge and experience to the conversation, because that's what we're now having. It's not an expert right down thing. It is we're co-creating some knowledge. And students, certainly the participants in our courses, are not empty vessels to be filled, right? They come wanting to know maybe something about online, supporting students in the online environment, but they're active participants, and their questions and their disagreements and their perspectives shape the learning process. And I think we've changed the course, Susan, at least tweaked it every single time we've taught it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right? And
Yep.
based on feedback that we've gotten,
Mhm.
and in coaching in general, which is sort of the overlay for a lot of the work we do, we always say, if we need to be experts in anything, let's be experts in curiosity. And I think we've translated that to this course as well, right? We're curious about how to best support our online students. We're curious about how to best support each other. And we think that for online modalities, it means designing for a genuine back and forth, right? A genuine dialogue rather than post and respond. I mean, can you even see my eyes rolling? This post and respond compliance, right?
Mhm.
Creating a space where students can, question and authentically respond.
Absolutely.
What I miss, Susan? Anything? We're happy to
Yep.
take any questions. Alex, Aileen, anyone. Please feel free to jump in, comments, questions.
Thank you so much. Yes, I opened up the floor for any questions. There was just a couple comments in the chat. I'll start with the fun one. Love The Office.
Thank you.
There was also a question about if the slides will be shared afterwards.
Sure, of course. Yeah, we'd be happy to.
And along those same lines, there was also at the beginning of your presentation, you referenced citations or a
References.
list.
Yeah, I have a list. Yeah, I can find them.
Perhaps that could be included.
Yes, absolutely. Can make it like a closing slide. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll certainly take any other questions. But while we have a moment, I just want to also share that we have some additional webinars coming up in January, February, and March. You can find more information on our website, which I'll put in the chat. And this recording will also be posted to our YouTube channel, which I have also shared in the chat. Are there any questions or conversation that can add to the presentation or any other comments? There's a question in the chat. Just last week, a student asked about requirements for posting and responding. Any suggestions on student needs for these quantitative guidelines as related to contemplative pedagogy?
So it was sort of like, how long does the paper have to be? That version, that kind of question. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, how did I'm curious how you responded, and then I can take a shot at your question. I have. I like that. Hold on, let me give it some thought. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that you can ask this is what I would ask students. Um when you're free writing, right? How where do you struggle? Where do you find interest? Is there a part of the paper that you want to emphasize? Is there a part of the paper you want to question? Sometimes I add metacognitive prompts even to the assignment, like what makes this difficult to think through? How did you approach this differently than usual? And then, so as not to fetishize good versus bad writing and the length of a document as being reflective of good, I'll give them a range and I'll tell them why the range is but a range. And I'll talk about iterative writing practice and I'll talk about writing tutoring and I'll talk about developmental approaches to writing versus this is exactly how many words you have to have. And if you have one word over, you obviously didn't know what you were talking about. If you have one word under, you're even worse, right? So that's what I do. I kind of turn it back on them to wonder why these things are important. And if they are important to some of their professors, it's a fine question to ask. And I might suggest they're not important to me because it's not. And I make it a more developmental question than a quantity question, if that makes sense. But I always remind them that other faculty may not approach it that way. So I try not to shame the question.
Mm.
I just answer it so that it's framed in a more contemplative, developmental way. Is that helpful?
They add thank you in the
I,
chat.
mhm.
Sorry, go ahead,
I
Susan.
love what you just said, Michelle, and it's interesting because early in on my work with supporting students,
Mm-hmm.
I often had the assumption that when students asked that question, that it came from a place where they wanted to do just the bare minimum. Like, let me just hit your minimum, right? And what I
Right,
discovered over the years is that it as equally came from a group of students who wanted to hit it out of the park.
right,
And they were pretty
right.
much asking, where is the home run wall?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's
And,
interesting. Yeah, yeah.
so sometimes it's good because our assumptions can influence our responses, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And
yes, that's so good. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you, Susan, are you seeing in that Leslie put in the chat, I always give an example of a student who wrote a lot, but none of it was on topic because she was high. That was so
Oh
Leslie,
my.
that was more my face-to-face world where students would roll in and I'm like, do we even know where you are right now? Does anybody know where you are right now? Oh, thanks. Oh, thanks, Alex. These are great
Michelle,
links.
I just wanted
Yes,
to
babe.
say that it's more about quality than quantity,
Yes, yes,
and
exactly.
also that
Yeah.
if you really what you're trying to do is help students to understand how to get to higher order, more critical thinking, more
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
contemplative thinking, more creative thinking, more applying what it is that they are reading and understanding and learning
Right.
in a way that makes their thinking and their learning visible to you. And so, have, the requirement of, respond to the question and then respond to
Mm-hmm.
two of your colleagues if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
have a rubric, for example, or if you don't have examples, somebody mentioned that they posted an
Mm-hmm.
example, then you get very flat and not necessarily productive or what you're hoping for in terms of the responses, the students do need some guidance and some understanding, both for the students who just want to do the bare minimum and those who want to excel, right? So the
Yep.
rubric, I think, really helps, or can help.
Oh, yeah. You know what, Alex? Actually, I'm glad that you said that because we're talking about the CPD course. Now, if
Yeah.
I switch to like Empire Faculty Lens, I
Okay.
do post in
Yes.
like the first, second week, maybe of courses. Like I'm like, long course announcement, right? I post what a more contemplative approach to the discussion prompts looks like, right? Because it's not about like, holding some secret, right? There's a way
Right.
to do this, but I'm not going to show you how to do it. It's not that. I'm very clear that it's but an example of how to approach this, but how I like them to sort of think through course readings to support assertions, right? Everything that you're saying. And I
Yeah.
do. We don't do that in the CPD courses. I mean, we could. It's never really come up. Susan, do you
Well, a
think?
rubric can really help
Right.
to frame
Yeah.
what it is that
Mm-hmm.
you are expecting in
Mm-hmm.
a way that is external, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
interpretable
Yeah.
by every
Yep.
individual.
Mm-hmm.
And what I try to do with my rubric for discussion is to make sure that the students understand, how to support their assertions,
Yep.
um,
Yes.
and
Yes. Yes.
how to dig deeper to apply contextually what it is that
Yes.
they are
Yes.
learning about in
Yep. Yep.
theory or in whatever to the question. And so every
Mm-hmm.
student is going to frame it from their own
Their own
perspective,
perspective,
their
their lived
own lived
experience.
interests,
Yep. Yep.
and
Yep.
and then it's going to generate some interesting, really
Yeah.
interesting, deep
Yeah.
conversations, which
Yep.
is what I want. I don't ever want to see in my class a discussion that is flat, where they're just answering
Right.
the
Right.
capital of New York is Albany, right? Like done.
No.
There's
Ew.
one answer
No.
to that, right?
Right. That's
Um,
right. That's right.
or I don't want them to say, yes, I agree. So in my rubric, I tell them they're prepped
Mm-hmm.
that you can agree with somebody, but that is
Right.
not a response,
It's
right?
not right. It's
Um,
just affirming. We
so
don't
I
want just
tell them,
affirming responses. Right.
yeah, I
Yep.
tell them
Yep.
what's acceptable and I
Yep.
show them an example and I have a rubric. And then most of the first discussion in my course is helping them to learn how to apply the rubric to their own responses and helping each other to try to, to give. So in my class, they have to do peer reviews of the posts.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
so
Yep.
they then are kind of coaching them in between themselves, and they get some coaching
Mm-hmm.
from me on how to
Mm-hmm.
apply the rubric.
Yep.
So
Yep.
anyway, oh, Michelle, I see you
Yep.
just put something in the chat. So yeah, anyway, I
Yeah.
think that answer to one post and then two responses, if you just
Mm-hmm.
have that,
Yep.
that's not
It's
gonna
flat.
achieve what
No,
you
it's
want.
flat.
So you
Yep.
really have to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. No, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I use the same language, Alex. Go ahead, Susan.
Now, I was going to say, and for a professional development course, we have the advantage that it's SUNY colleagues. And generally, what we have found is that the first person who posts on a discussion kind of sets a tone,
Yeah.
sets a bar. And if
Yeah.
that person has done a really thoughtful, contemplative kind of response, we're good. We're good, right? If not, we can lead and nudge the rest of the group and even that person to come back and add
Mm-hmm.
by the questions that we ask in our
Mm-hmm.
follow-up post to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love the whole appreciative inquiry approach of,
Yeah.
we shape things by the questions we ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have found that that's kind of worked well for us. Now, given we're not
Mm-hmm.
working with students, we're working with colleagues in a professional development course.
Right. Yeah. No, it's good. Thanks, Alex. Thank you, Susan, for adding that. Any other
And
questions?
yep, actually, just building on the last question,
Yep.
can you speak to the relationship between grading and deadline policies and these contemplative pedagogy principles?
I can. Susan, do you want me to take that
No,
one?
go right ahead, Michelle.
Yes, yes, yes. So, just to make sure I understand the question, are we Actually, I don't understand the question. Can you? I don't. Tell me more. Say more.
Sturdy, if you would like to come off mute to explain anything beyond what you added in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
But I think, oh, go ahead.
Hey.
So I was just curious about the like obviously deadline stress and grade stress is
Mhm.
kind of antithetical
Right.
to everything you were just presenting about. So can you just talk a little bit about like do you shape those policies at all to try and remove those as
Yeah.
factors or mitigate that at all? And if so,
Yeah.
how?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right, right? There's a tension between asking students kind of to slow down, right, and reflect while simultaneously having time, space, and place anxiety, right, through tight deadlines. And as someone else said in the chat, maybe I said this, grades are our currency, right? Grades are currency. So there's sort of the structural conditions that sometimes undermine the pedagogy, I think is what I hear you saying, right? So, I mean, certainly we can create grading structures that weight the components, right? The reflections, the working drafts as heavily as a final project, right? From a writing perspective, I was a writing tutor in grad school. So I tend to bring some of that, again, 90s, you're welcome, composition theory. All papers are a draft until they're due, and then they're due because they have to be due at some point, to your point. But they're all drafts, right? So really emphasizing that sort of developmental piece as heavily as the final products. How students respond to feedback, for example, or respond to Alex's point, respond to feedback from each other, even. Um, you know, some in some assignments, I've offered revision opportunities, right? That reward us to use that word, but that acknowledge the deeper thinking over the correctness, right? And then that's sort of baked in. We still have a deadline, but there's opportunities to revise, right? And also grading participation. So to Alex's point about, one response, two replies, that kind of thing. So based on thoughtfulness, right? And connection rather than volume or speed or some other metric, right? Um, Sometimes I can build buffers into assignment sequences. Sometimes I can um, if sometimes students will turn in papers early and say, can I get some early feedback on this? And I give it to them and then, say, well, we have writing center tutors. What does that look like? We talk about writing as developmental. So I think there's ways to maybe inform some flexibility and emphasize the reflective pieces of the assignment and still honor the reality of the registrar needs our grades in by a certain time, right? The other the other thing I'm thinking is that it's kind of like, when campuses lament how to get faculty involved in A, B, and C, my standard response is make it a part of our tenure process, right? Human beings often have to be incentivized to do things. We can't do everything at once. So if you would like us to be more ABC focused, make that a bucket for tenure and review, right? And then that's how we show the value. So similarly with students, if we value those elements more than something else, maybe we signal that deadlines and contemplative practice can meaningfully coexist without erasing each other. Hope that helped. Time management skills can be a point of reflection. Yes, Tonka. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. You're welcome, Sturdy. Yes, Tonka, that's exactly right. And that's like a piece of what we hope comes out with the Saucy thing, which the Saucy tool. But I think yes, I think you're absolutely correct. Thank you for adding that. Tonka is one of my long lost colleagues at Empire. Boo.
Well, are there any other questions in the couple moments that we have left? So once again, I'm just throwing in the chat where our recordings will be posted on our YouTube channel. We have some additional webinars coming up. We certainly hope to see you there. And once again, I want to thank our presenters, Susan and Michelle, and thank you everyone for coming. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We got through a whole webinar without talking about the weather. I want that noted in the official record. We did not start this webinar talking about the weather, okay?
Why, is something happening with the weather?
I mean, I don't know, some snow.